Hello everybody, welcome to episode 36 of my YouTube channel. This time I'm going to talk about the game of Wellington's First Battle that I took to the Other Partizan last month in 2024. The game was centred around the combat for Boxtel on the 15th of September 1794. This story starts a few years ago. Back in 2011 I published my first book, Wellington's First Battle, about Boxtel. I've since done more research and included it as in fact two scenarios in Throwing Thunderbolts, my Wargamer's Guide to the War of the First Coalition. And so this is what the game that I'm going to present to you today is based on. So if we look at Wellington's first and last battles and compare them on scale, importance and fame, this is what we see. Well, at Boxtel, Wellington was part of a battle that only involved 10,000 men, whereas obviously at Waterloo there were 200,000 men involved. And in importance, a similar story. The result of Boxtel was just another retreat for the Duke of York as he left Flanders, against obviously the end of Napoleon at Waterloo. And there was no fame to be gained at Boxtel. There was actually no mention of Wellington at all in any account of Boxtel written before the time of Waterloo. Boxtel's true significance lies in what Wellington said in 1837 about his experiences in Holland. I learnt more by seeing our faults and the defects of our system in the campaign of Holland than anywhere else. I thought it was important to include this chart, which shows the various names under which Wellington is recorded in the army lists between 1794 and 1810. We all know him as the Duke of Wellington, but actually his name changed not once but twice. And at this time in 1794 he's the Honourable Arthur Wesley. So starting with some campaign background, in July 1794 the situation in the Netherlands looked something like this. Two French armies, Pichegru's and Jourdan's, were beginning their advance against the Allied armies, the Dutch in orange, the British in red and the Austrians in yellow. And as you can see on the little box on off the coast, it was at this point that Wesley arrived at Ostend to begin his first campaign. So here are the strength of those armies. The Army du Nord under Pichegru had 83,000 men about, the Sambre-Meurs under Jourdan 90,000, the Duke of York's army only 30,000, and the Austrian army 48,000, with the United Provinces, the Dutch, only able to bring 12,000 to the battlefield. Thus, the levy en masse had delivered a total of 170,000 men to attack the 90,000 Allies over a 90-mile front. For the Allies, the summer began with defeats. In May, Mack attempted to surround the Army of the North, but was beaten by French initiative by Suham and was thrown back. The Duke of York was particularly beaten up in this battle. In June, the Allies again attempted to relieve the siege of Charleroi, but failed miserably and had to withdraw, with the Austrians in particular losing heart for the fight in Flanders. Now, as I've said already, Wesley arrived in June in Ostend. They disembarked. He was commanded by Colonel Weiss of the King's Dragoon Guards. They had one look at the enemy, the French, and decided it would be better to get back on their boats and move further up the coast. In August, the frontier fortresses of Le Quesnoy and Valenciennes fell to the French, and this freed up Pichegru to advance further into the Austrian Netherlands. The Duke of York fell back before the forces of Pichegru, expecting that the fortress of Bergen op Zoom and Breda would be besieged and would slow the French down. Instead, in September, Pichegru launched a further offensive across the River Dommel against the Duke of York's forces. And on the 14th September, the Hessian and Hanoverian outposts on the River Dommel were overwhelmed, losing 2,000 men. And this map shows those movements I've just referred to. Duke of York actually pulled his main body back behind the River Our, leaving his outposts on the River Dommel. And you can see the two fortresses that the Duke of York was relying on to slow the French up on the left of the map. And Nijmegen is in the top right, which will be a later defensive point. So this map shows the positions on the morning of the 14th of September, with Hanoverian and Hessian light troops of the Duke of York's advance guard along the River Dommel, and closing in on that 12,000 people, men, were 40,000 French in the shapes of the divisions of Souham, Dessau, Delmas and Bonneau. By the afternoon of the 14th, von Düring's Hessians had fallen back to St. Michaelsgestel, while von Hammerstein had managed to hold with his Hanoverians the river line at St. Odenrode. Delmas was across the river, somewhere between, I should say, Boxtel and Schyndel, with the Duke of York's main body sitting quietly at Middelrode on the River Our. The disaster at Boxtel, which had overtaken the Hessians, was reported to the Duke of York later that day, and at about midnight he decided that he would send Abercromby with the Corps de Reserve to try and retake Boxtel from the French. And we'll go through this in detail, but Abercromby's Corps de Reserve included 2 brigades of infantry, and of those the Coldstream Guards were put at Erp as a flank guard, and the 12th Foot were at St. Michaelsgestel as the other flank guard, while Abercromby advanced. And also at dawn, the French attacked again at St. Michaelsgestel, and Delmas launched a reconnaissance towards Schyndel. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're mainly interested in what happened within the Purple Circle, as Abercromby and Delmas felt their way towards one another. At this point, it's worth saying a thing or two about maps in the 18th century. And in the National Army Museum, there are the maps that Colonel Weiss actually used on their campaign. And you can see here that advancing from Heeswick and Dinther from the British camp on the River Our, the road to Boxtel looks fairly open, and avoids on this map the village of Schyndel, which might explain why James Russell, the trumpeter of the 1st King's Dragoon Guards, thought he was already in Boxtel when they met the French. However, there were more accurate maps, and Heinrich Verhees published a map here, very concurrent with this period, and you can see the road from Heeswick and Dinther goes through Schyndel before it goes to Boxtel, and the little G's record where these places are on the appropriate Google map, so showing how accurate Vahey's map actually is. And this is the one we shall use in this discussion. So where's the battlefield? In the yellow box is the little village of Schyndel, and on the right of the map are two quotes from very contemporary or near contemporary histories of the battle. In front and inclining to the left of Abercromby's corps, which had advanced through Schyndel, was a plain skirted by a thick plantation of firs, which was written by Francis Clark. Clearing the village of Schyndel in the grey of the morning, the mounted pickets of the enemy were first discovered. So, which indicates, in their instances, that Schyndel is central to where the action took place. And for this game, that's the assumption I've taken. And this is the relevant section of his map. And the little red blocks are individual buildings. And there's a sort of wooded, marshy area on the left-hand side. And at the bottom, it's more like a moorland. And this is my rendition of it for Wargames purposes. So this is the order of battle for the British at Boxtel on the 15th. Lieutenant General Ralph Abercromby led the Corps de Reserve of the Duke of York's army, which comprised the Brigade of Guards, which with the Coldstream Guards missing, included just the 1st and the 3rd Regiment of Foot Guards. 3rd Regiment obviously much later became the Scots Guards. There were also 2 flank battalions, so there were 4 companies of grenadiers from the Foot Guards in a separate grenadier battalion, and also the newfangled light companies, which had just been reintroduced, were grouped together in an 8-company battalion. Supporting the infantry were 6 battalion guns, 2 each with the Grenadier 1st and 3rd Foot Guards, and these were light 6-pounders. With the Guards were the 3rd Brigade. Now this brigade is actually supposed to be commanded by Major General Nesbitt Balfour, but he was elsewhere doing other duties and wasn't present at the time. So Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Wesley was the senior officer in the brigade at the time, and so he by default became the brigade's commander. The 3 regiments were present were the 33rd, 42nd, the Black Watch, and the 44th. The 12th, I've already mentioned, was absent as flank guard at St Michael's Gestor. The artillery again was 6 battalion guns, and these were a mixture of light 6-pounders and 24-pounder howitzers, or 5.5-inch howitzers. Finally, there was the cavalry brigade led by Colonel Richard Vyse, which was combined a couple of squadrons of the King's Dragoon Guards, the 8th Light Dragoons, and the 14th Light Dragoons, and also the 16th Light Dragoons. And finally, part of the new research is there were 2 12-pounder guns detached from the Park artillery that accompanied the Abercrombie's force, and had to leave 2 of the heavier guns behind halfway through the journey, but from Morris's diary we know that 2 medium 12-pounders were there. Altogether about 5,000 men of all ranks plus the 14 guns. And here for your delight and delectation are the Allied commanders of about the time we're talking about. So the French comprised the 6th Division of the Army du Nord, led by General Division Antoine Guillaume Delmas, and he had only one brigade, but it was divided into two parts: an advance guard under Chef de Battalion David Henry Chassé of Waterloo fame, the 8th Regiment of Hussars, the 30th of Demo Brigade of Light Infantry, and also a company of light or horse artillery. So the brigade was commanded by Herman Daendels and comprised a further 3 battalions of the 29th Demo Brigade de Bataille and the 199th Demo Brigade de Bataille, each of whom were supported by 6 battalion guns. There's a strong Dutch theme through this. Both the horse artillery and the light infantry, as well as Daendels and Chassé themselves, were from the Netherlands rather than France. Altogether about 5,300 men plus 18 guns. And here are photographs or portraits of the French commanders, although Chassé is obviously taken much later in life. So let's run through the timeline to put the game in context. It's about midnight, either a little before, Abercrombie left Berlecombe camp with his force. Also at midnight, von Hammerstein, who was at St Erdenrode on the Allied left flank, heard that Boxtel had fallen and had begun to retire himself. At 2 a.m. The Duke of York wrote to von Hammerstein and told him to reoccupy St Erdenrode on the left as Abercrombie was advancing towards Boxtel. At about that time, Abercrombie has heard that St Erdenrode had been evacuated and asked the Duke of York what he should do, and the decision was to continue on. At 6:15, Abercrombie gets to Schyndel at about daybreak and spots the French, and then stops again to consult the Duke of York. So now we get to the action itself, and in 1796 an anonymous officer of the Guards wrote a history of the campaign, and in this he liked to write his history as verse and have footnotes which explain the meaning of the verse. But I included this description of Abercrombie's attack so you can understand a bit about what was in the minds of some of these officers. Abercrombie led on the reserve, and we here was assisted by hints from the famed bombardier, but feeling their pulses we presently found them on assez grand nombre and shifted our ground. The retreat was made good, and unmarked by much slaughter, we managed next morning to punt over the water. Interesting thing here is the famed bombardier. I've not been able to identify him, but it could be the older Congreve, but I've not seen that confirmed anywhere else. So this is the battlefield showing the deployment with Weiss and the cavalry out front, the Guards Brigade 2nd and Wesley as the rear guard. It's unclear as to how close up Wesley was, but for the purposes of the game, that's what I've assumed. Likewise, the advance guard of the French, which were conducting a reconnaissance, have Daendels right behind them. I think because we know Daendels' skirmishers were definitely involved in the fighting early on, it's likely that they were there and thereabouts, because it's a long way back through the wooded area, marshy area, before they get some clear ground. So let's look at the action again in a bit of detail. Dawn at that time was about 6:15 local time, and as we said, Abercrombie could see the French in the woods outside Schyndel. He then sent Captain Rutherford of the Royal Engineers on a reconnaissance, and he managed to get himself captured. Meanwhile, Abercromby consulted the Duke of York as to whether he should continue his attack, because obviously he's met a large force several miles short of his target, Boxtel. The Duke of York, not being on the spot, told him to continue the attack as far as you think wise, which was obviously very helpful. So, allowing for the exchange of letters, it must have been at least 7:30 before the advance began, and the Light Dragoons, supported by the Guards, advanced with Wellington's or Wesley's brigade in reserve, and the 8th Hussars retired into the woods amongst their infantry, which was remarked on very disparagingly by the British, but what they probably didn't know is that the 8th Hussars were unlikely to have had any carbines with which to do the skirmishing with. The French artillery, which had been a bit hidden, then opened fire, and the Light Dragoons hurriedly retired behind the Guards' infantry. And then we have this incident where Captain Bristow of the 1st Foot Guards was sent forward with his company to actually deal with one of the cannon, and whether it's the same incident or a different one, the French reporter Sergeant Fistre became famous because there was a cannon that had been deserted by its crew, and he leapt off his horse and fired the loaded cannon at the oncoming British. Whether that's related to Bristow or not is difficult to say, but Abercromby then decided to call off the attack and sent the 8th Light Dragoons forward to cover the retreat. The retreating 1st Foot Guards became a bit disordered by the close broken terrain, and Captain Bristow was lost with most of his men to the French skirmishers. The 8th Light Dragoons were forced back by the 8th Hussars, and this required the 33rd Foot famously to hold off the French cavalry while the Guards were able to complete their retirement. So, having a broader look at the timeline, we know that at about 8 o'clock the 12th Foot and the Hessians were attacked again at St Michaelsgestel by overwhelming numbers of French infantry and cavalry led by Suham, and they were pushed back, lost 50 men and one of their battalion guns. And the suggestion is that Abercromby, hearing of this attack, decided to call off his own attack at Schyndel. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon he'd reached Burlicombe, where the main army was camped, and they'd already started packing up and sending their wagons away towards the Meuse River. And in the afternoon that retirement took hold, with Abercromby providing the rear guard, and they left Burlicombe at 9 o'clock at night, having marched all the night before. So the end of the action at Schyndel in the morning was marked by some daring do on the part of the British as they scrambled to get away from the pursuing 8th French Hussars. So both Robert Crawford from the Royal Irish Artillery, who was manning a pair of battalion guns, James Fraser of the Black Watch, and the 16th Light Dragoons were all praised for their actions in trying to hold off the French cavalry. And the 8th Hussars went quite a long way in their pursuit. So here you can see the official return of casualties for the 15th of September as kept in the National Archives. In total there was about 90 casualties, only half of them at Schyndel. And the interesting thing is that the Light Dragoons, despite being pressed, only lost 3 men. although the 16th Light Dragoons are not included in this report. The big losers were the 1st Foot Guards and the 12th Foot. When we talk about French casualties, we have Sherbrooke's account. He led the 33rd Foot while Wesley was leading the brigade. So he describes how his regiment was charged by 2 regiments of French cavalry, and they fired on the leading regiment and stretched the whole regiment, killed the whole of the 1st regiment. The 2nd regiment, witnessing what happened to the 1st, faced about and were nowhere to be seen. So this implies loads and loads of casualties. In fact, the French casualty reports claim that only 15 men were killed and wounded. After this action, the Allies, as I've said, retreated back to the River Meuse at Grave, and obviously the recriminations start. So first to be criticised is Pichegru, who was criticised by Delmas and Rainier for not being more aggressive on the 15th and 16th, and they felt he could have trapped the Allies against the River Meuse if they'd have followed up faster. Given the numerical superiority of the French, they probably had a point. And the Duke of York was criticised by his Dutch allies for not being more aggressive on the 15th. Most of his army spent the time in their camp at Berlicot. He was also later criticised by historians for leaving the advanced troops of von Hammerstein too exposed on the River Dommel beyond ready supporting range. After the battle, the British and Allied army retreated from one river line to another, all the way back to Bremen. Wesley thought he'd learnt enough by about February, and having fought a small action at Geldermalsen in January, he went home on leave. In fact, the 33rd Foot Wesley's regiment didn't actually embark until the 13th of April 1795 to return home. And Chassé is not the only link to Waterloo. Pack, Cook and Byng, all famous generals from Waterloo, were definitely in the fields around Schyndel in September 1794, and probably also Vandeleur and Maitland and Thomas Pakenham Vandeleur, who were certainly in theatre, but I can't definitely demonstrate they were there on the 15th of September. And there were lots of other generals fighting as more junior ranks in both armies. Morellet became a famous cavalry general, and you can see there Tompkins, Hillgrove, Turner, who brought back the Rosetta Stone, I think, Prince, Murray, Campbell, and Long, Disney and Donaduo were certainly in the campaign. Whether they were there on the day or not, I can't confirm. Finally, to cover the history part, I mentioned new research, and that's focused on exactly where the battle took place. And there is an alternative which is shown in the red box, and it really depends on how you interpret various pieces of evidence. The swings on Morris's diary. He was with the Guards Brigade, and he mentioned that they marched 3 miles beyond Schyndel, which would place them outside the battlefield I've just shown you. And here's that alternative battlefield in from throwing Thunderbolts, and it's an alternative. I'm not totally convinced, to be honest. And secondly, you can make an intermediate claim for a battlefield just outside of Hermelin, if you want to, but I'm less convinced of that one. And this is that battlefield. It's a bit tight, constrained, I think, but it's possible. So there's a whole discussion of the which battlefield to pick, depending on where you stand on some of the history. And I'm not going to go into that now. You'll be delighted to hear. But if you want to know more about it, then look for this video on my YouTube channel, Where Did Wellington Fight His First Battle, which is a presentation I gave at a conference a couple of years ago, and takes you through the argument, which basically is a time and motion study. In my view, given the delays, Abercromby couldn't have got much past Schyndel and made it back to the camp in the time that the witnesses claim. But you page money makes a choice. So after that long preamble, we finally get to the game that I presented at the Other Partizan. And this is the view of the setup as it was on the day. You can see my book throwing Thunderbolts prominently on the corner of the table. This shot is taken from the French side of the table. You can see Dandel's infantry nearest the camera, and in the middle ground is the 8th Hussars in skirmish order, and in Schyndel in the back with the Allies just emerging. And this is another shot showing the French deployment. And here we can see the British emerging from the village of Schyndel. The cards laying on the table are my leadership cards to tell you something about the various generals involved on the thing. The other thing this photograph shows is the ditches that ran throughout the site, and were, I think, the cause for the first guards getting disorganised as they retreated. And they're made using resin pouring into the routed out MDF, and look quite good on the day. And this is a close-up of the French deployment, with the light infantry at the front in the woods, the hussars in skirmish order, with the light artillery behind them hidden, and the line infantry all deployed in columns around the small farmhouses. Another view of the French deployment, which gives me a chance to talk about the small farmhouses that are scattered all over the battlefield. These are very small in comparison to a black powder built up area block, which should be the size of a standard infantry unit. So none of the houses are in the fields are actually available to be garrisoned, because they're just too insignificant. So also, I'm not showing all of them. It's about 1 in 3 displayed on the table. Another shot showing the British emerging from the village of Schyndel, with the moorland at the bottom of the table of the photograph, and a final shot of the British emerging from Schyndel. So I'm now going to show the photographs of the game as it was played. I was managing the whole thing on my own on the day, so I haven't got a full record of the game in action. But you'll get a feel for the action as we go through it. So there was a game in the morning and another game in the afternoon, which we had a lot of interest in, and people tended to stick with it for a couple of hours, so that was good. So the first shot of pictures show the game that took place in the morning.
Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Le peuple en ce jour sans cesse répète. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Malgré les mutins tout réussira. Nos ennemis confus en restent là. Et nous allons chanter Alléluia. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Cambrelo jadis du clergé par là. Comme un prophète, il prédit cela en chantant ma chansonnette. Avec plaisir, on dira ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, ça ira malgré les mutins, tout réussira. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, suivant la maxime de l'évangile. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, du législateur tout s'accomplira. Celui qui s'élève, on l'abaissera. Celui qui s'abaisse, on l'élèvera. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Le vrai catéchisme nous instruira. Et l'affreux fanatisme s'éteindra. Pour être à la loi docile, tout Français s'exercera. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Ça ira malgré les mutins. Tout réussira. Ah ça cadra, ça cadra, ça cadra. On va trop bien le nouer pour que ça se délie. Ah ça cadra, ça cadra, ça cadra. Et dans 2000 ans on s'en souviendra. Le despotisme expirera. La liberté triomphera. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Nous n'avons plus ni noble ni prêtre. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. L'égalité régnera.
Well, thanks very much for watching, and if you've enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel. And if you're interested in the wars of the First Coalition has been piqued, please consider buying my book, Throwing Thunderbolts. Thank you and goodbye.